So today we are going to start our discussion on history writing during Sultanate period. The establishment of Delhi Sultanate was one of the very important event that has changed the dynamics of history in the Indian subcontinent. Uh, the Sultanate was established by the people who were follower of Islam, and they were Turk. And before coming to India, the history writing as a discipline, history writing as a tradition was well established in the Islamic world. It started from Arab, as we have seen. And the Arab, they conquered Persia, and as we have already seen while discussing Arab historiography, that the tradition of Persian history writing have significantly influenced the Arab history writing. Now, Arab, under the banner of Islam, they got united, and the Islam spread to many parts of the world. The tribe like Turk, who were in the pre-Islamic period, who were having an influence of some anemic religion, some tribal religion, and some Buddhism, became Muslim, and now they also started spreading Islam in all direction. The people who established Delhi Sultanate were not Arab, the people among whom the Islam has taken birth, but they were Turk who were converted to Islam, and they had a religious zeal to spread their religion. Arab, they conquered early, before the establishment of Delhi Sultanate. In the 8th century itself, they conquered the part of Sindh, but they could not penetrate deeper into the Indian subcontinent, and they went back. It was the Turk, the recently, not very recently, but relatively, who converted to Islam. They were the founder of the Islamic State in India as Delhi Sultanate. Now, before the coming of the Turk and establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, the kind of the tradition of preserving the past knowledge we was quite different than what came to be practiced under Delhi Sultanate. For example, we call Ramayana and Mahabharata as Itihasa. But nowadays, in modern days, we use the word itihasa as a kind of synonym or translation of the word history. But that was not the so during those period. The word itihasa is used, uh, and it had a meaning that as it was. And the main emphasis was on the learning the lesson from the past exemplary stories. It did not had a scientific basis which prompt us to investigate the truth. The more emphasis was on the learning the moral lesson. And there are very few examples like Raj Tarangini, who had in fact Kallana, who writes the history of Kashmir. But then apart from these few examples, Indian people before the coming of Islam, or before the establishment of Delhi Sultanate, did not really had a lot of tradition of writing scientific evidence based reliable historical account. Delhi Sultanate have started this tradition. They have already Islamic world had already well developed tradition, as we have seen. They had a tradition of Ibn Khaldun and Ibn Battuta and so on and so forth. There are a number of important feature of the kind of history writing that started during Sultanate period, and one of it is that most of the people who wrote history during this period, they themselves were participant in the war, they themselves were participant in the politics, and that is the reason they had a kind of first hand experience of participation in the war, participation in the politics, and that account has been very useful to them when they started writing history, because as they were eyewitness to the many historical event. Next important thing about the history writing during this period is that most of the history written either by the people who themselves were involved in the politics or by the professional historian. Before the coming of the existence of the Delhi Sultanate, India did not had hardly had a category of professional historian who are paid and whose only job was to write history, and that came into existence during the Sultanate period. Another important thing is that from the versified, the poetic account of the past, now the account has moved towards the more prose kind of account. Except few exceptions like Amir Khusro, who was a historian of this period, Sultanate period, and he wrote a versified form of history. And in versified form of history, in poetry, the emphasis is more on the literary effect and not on a finding of the fact. During the Sultanate period, the ruling nobility, the Sultan and his courtier and the important officers and the governors, they mostly came from outside: Turk, Arab, Persia, Iraq. And these people, as they came from outside and they established their control over the Indian subcontinent, not complete Indian subcontinent, the northern India, and which included present day Pakistan as well. They felt that they should keep an account of their achievements, and that was also one of the important factor that had contributed to the giving inspiration for the writing of history. Though this the history written during this period is full of lot of information, but there seems to be more emphasis on narrating the events. There is a lack of causation. There is also a lack of scientific investigation. History is written with the purpose to amuse the reader, as well as it is also written, history is written with a different purpose. As well as it is also written for the education of the prince, that the prince should learn from the past event, do introspection, and keep him on the right track, as he will learn from the ancestors that when they were on the right track, they could achieve greater deed, and when they failed to remain on the right track, they were failure. So historian of this period were not researcher, serious researcher, but they were narrator. We get a lot of sources of this period. Number of farmans were issued by the sultans, and there was correspondence of sultan with the different governors, different officials, and all that we find a record. At the same time, we find that significant number of the historian of this period, though they have narrated and they have gathered a lot of information, they did believe that they did believe that everything happens by the divine will, everything happens by the will of Allah, and this kind of history is also called providential history. Now, the history writing of this period is categorized into the different category. One is general history, one is eulizing history, then there are history that is written specifically with the purpose of giving moral lessons. Then there is a poetic history, then there are biographies of Sufis, then there is Wasiyatnama. What it is, the general history are those history that gives information about the pre-Islamic Arabia, Persia, Roman Empire. You see, Delhi Sultanate was in Indian subcontinent, but many times we find that the historian employed in the court of Delhi Sultanate used to write about the history of Central Asia, used to write history of Prophet Muhammad and Khalifa, because they felt that cultural, religious, emotional connection with Central Asia, as the religion came from outside. They wrote about prophet, they wrote about caliphs, the kings, family nobility, military expedition, history of different Muslim countries, and all that is considered as categorized as general history. Then next type of history is the eulogies. Usually this is done by the court historian. If a sultan is employed somebody in his court, the court historian generally will have praise for his king. For example, one of the important example is the poet Utbi. He has written Tariq-e-Yamini, and that is about Muhammad Ghazni. Then there is a history which is called didactic history, which is written with the specific purpose of imparting education to Sultan. And in this category, there is a there was a person called Ziauddin Barani, and he wrote the text called Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi. And intention was to educate Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Then there is a poetic history written by Amir Khusro and Hasan Nizami. Then there are biographies of Sufi. Apart from this conventional political historian, there had been a historian who wrote an account of Sufi Sant, Sufi Sufis, and that is generally written by the disciple of the Sufis. For example, we have a Khair ul Majlis by the Sufi called Hamid Kalandar, and it gives information about the famine and scarcity of grain that was felt during the period of Muhammad Ghazni. Then there is a next sixth kind of historical record that is called Wasiyatnama. Wasiyatnama is a will. Generally, elderly person, when they know that they are not left with many years to live, generally they write their will, and in that will, they divide their property among their descendant, among their children, who will be getting what. But the Wasiyatnama that we are referring now are not just the division of property. They did refer to the kind of ideas that is being transferred from one generation to another generation. By the way, is there anybody from Hindi medium? I'm just continuing in English. Well, I think nobody. Well. So, the ideas that is transferred from one generation to another generation, and in that category, there is a famous Wasiyatnama written by Balban for his son. And in that Wasiyatnama, Balban tells his son how the king should behave, how the king should conduct himself. And this Wasiyatnama gives us an idea about the idea of kingship, how the king should be. Well, so this is a general background. I told you how it has started. It started with the coming of Islam. Though the Arab, they were, it is among the Arabian people that the Islam has started. But in India, the Islamic Sultanate was established by the Turk, and the language is mostly Persian. We have some evidences, some early text in Arabic, that is, but then it is mostly Persian. Sometimes it is in Turkey. So we will now go and discuss about some of the important texts and some of the important historian of this period. The first important text that has reached to us is the text called Chachnama. And Chachnama gives us information about the conquest of Sindh region by the Arab. King Dahir, the Hindu king of Sindh, was defeated by the Arab, and in this conflict, the Buddhist monk of Sindh, they cooperated with the invaders. In fact, Hindu king and Buddhist monk, Hindu king Dahir and the Buddhist monk, they had certain conflict, and it was a Buddhist monk who helped the invader to defeat King Dahir. Then this book is already referred. Utbi, he was the poet of Muhammad Ghazni, and he wrote this eulogizing kind of text called Tariq-e-Yamini, and that praises Muhammad Ghazni. The next historian of reputation was Muhammad bin Mansur, or Fakr-e-Mudabbir, and he migrated first from Ghazni to Lahore during the Ghaznavi's period. And at Lahore, he compiled a text called Sajra-e Ansab, and this book gives genealogy of the Prophet of Islam, his family, who were the companion of Prophet Muhammad, and it gives information about the Muslim rulers. The book also gives information about the life and military expedition of Qutbuddin Aibak. Qutbuddin Aibak was first Sultan of Delhi. He came here as deputy of Muhammad Ghori, and Muhammad Ghori, when he won the war of Tarai in 1192, he goes back to Ghor in Afghanistan, but he leaves Qutbuddin Aibak as his deputy. And then Muhammad Ghori, he dies in 1206, and Qutbuddin Aibak becomes an independent ruler of Delhi Sultanate. His conquest and how he dealt with the defeated people, the Rajputs ruler who were defeated by Qutbuddin Aibak. They used to surrender, and he was generally following the reconciliatory policy with them. Then another important work compiled by the same person is that Adabul Harab wa Sujat, and this is dedicated to Sultan Iltutmish. Iltutmish was the second Sultan of Delhi Sultanate. He became Sultan in 1211 and died in 1236. And here he gives information about the functioning of the administrative machinery of Sultanate, the State Department, how the war was fought, what were the mode of warfare, who were the different war horses, and how these war horses should be treated. Then the next historian is Hassan Nizami Tajul Masir. He wrote the text called Tajul Masir, and in that Tajul Masir, we find the description of the second battle of Tarai, which was fought in 1192. And in this second battle of Tarai, Muhammad Ghori defeated Prithviraj Chauhan and Prithviraj Chauhan was killed. But 1 year before that, there was a first battle of Tarai in which Muhammad Ghori was defeated by Prithviraj Chauhan. But Hassan Nizami, being the loyal or being paid by the Sultan, he did not write about the first battle of Tarai in which Prithviraj Chauhan was victorious, but write about the second battle in which Muhammad Ghori was victorious. Definitely, he wrote with the intention of getting patronage from Sultan. Then Minajus Siraj was Qazi of Delhi, and he was appointed by Sultan Nasiruddin. And he wrote a text called Tabqat-e Nasiri. And Tabqat-e Nasiri is an epoch-making book, very important book. It gives extensive information, a lot of information about the Muslim ruler from Nile in Egypt to Ganges in India, and it gives information about the attack of Muhammad Ghazni, Muhammad Ghori, as well as the Mongol attack on India. It gives information about the life of prophets. A lot of informative events are mentioned into this, and but obviously there is no causation. There is no attempt of finding reason behind the event. Then Tariq-e-Mubarak Shahi, another text that is written by the person called Yahya bin Ahmad Sarhindi, and this is coming under the category of general history, and he was in the court of Sayyid ruler. The Delhi Sultanate was ruled by different dynasties, one after another. Lot of dynasties came to the throne, and one of the dynasty was Sayyid dynasty. We don't find lot of information. They did not have a lot of achievement to their credit, but the information about them, this is an important source to get information about the Sayyid ruler of Delhi, and he gives description. He goes further back. He gives description from the invasion of Muhammad Ghori to 1434. The information till Firoz Shah Tughlaq is mostly based on the written sources. He read all the history, not all, but most of the history written before him, and the information from Firoz Tughlaq onwards is generally on his own observation. He also gives information about the important nobles, and the information about the event from Tughlaq onward is given in quite in detail. He also believes that all the events are happening according to the will of the god, except of course Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He says he had died because of his foolishness. Then came another historian who was Sultan himself. Firoz Shah Tughlaq was Sultan of Delhi, and he wrote a text called Futuhat-e-Firoz Shahi, and he gives information. It's kind of autobiographical account. He gives information about the different reforms that he has initiated and the different projects that he undertook for the public welfare. Now, next historian is considered as one of the most important historian of the Sultanate period, and his name is Ziauddin Barani. And he wrote a text called Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi. Ziauddin Barani was very experienced person. He has seen the regime and worked with a different sultan. With Muhammad bin Tughlaq, he has worked for 17 years. He has seen the regime of 9 sultan. And at the age of 74, very experienced and very learned person, he wrote this text called Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi in 1358. And here he gives information from Balban to Firoz Shah. He dedicated this book to the Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq, and here definitely we do find some attempt of making an analysis of the cause and effect. how the development took place, and what were the causes behind the event. And he gives evidences of the statement he gives certain evidences. He reconstruct the lives of the noble family, and through the mouth of the noble family, we get certain information of the period. He gives list of the governor, high ranking officer of sultan, and this is quite a source mine for the information about the administration. He praises the market regulation of Alauddin Khilji and administration of Firoz Tughlaq. Alauddin Khilji has tried to control the prices in the market, and it is obvious from his writing that this person definitely had a historical sense. His account is quite effective, quite reliable, and he also gives information about philosophers and a poet and doctors and Maulavis and son. So he did not stick to the political event only, but gives information which is quite comprehensive. And in the introduction of this text, he expresses his opinion about what is history and what should be the nature of the historian. And he definitely says that the history, it should not be just narrate the event, but also try to search the reason behind the event. And when he also cautions that in order to impress the people, you should not make a very exaggerated, very pompous and false statement in history writing. The language of the historian should be very easy to understand, and the purpose of history is to speak the truth and to provide moral lesson. The event of the past, if you are learned in the event of the past, if you are familiar with the event of the past, you it will be easier for you to judge the people and what is good and what is bad for you. So if you want to lead a good meaningful life, it's important to study history. And from his text we get information about the saint, the great people, philosopher, administrator, ruler, and this is definitely develop our mind and intellect. He did list out the duties of the Muslim ruler, and he said, he wrote at a quite an mature age, and he says that I have studied different sciences, I have studied different subjects, but it is a history which had benefited me a lot, and he calls history as a queen of science. So history, if you study history, that will strengthen your reason, that will strengthen your judgment, because you are now being enriched by the experience of other people. Barani, he really had a very high conception of history, and he considered it as an essential duty to record it with honestly, with truth. He was related to court, so he had access to a lot of information, a lot of sources, and he was quite bold also. He, at number of places, he did criticize the ruler, and he also showers the praise on them where they deserve it. uh, According to him, history is having a significant purpose of guiding the humanity, and his inquisitive bent of mind and fearless temperament is obvious. For him, history was true religion. And he lists out the benefit of studying history. He says that history introduces us to the lives of the great man, saint, thinker, and sultan. It opens up wisdom of the past. It excites our reason and judgment by studying the experiment of the past. It comforts us at the time of our misfortune and adversity. Uh, and if you study history, you will become little fearless, because we think a lot about hypothetical danger, that danger may not come. But history reading also warn us about the coming of danger. In history there had been certain telltale sign where now the danger or the invasion or the conspiracy has taken place. So if you read in detail, you will also become aware what kind of danger can come to you. It encourages patience and resignation also. Patiently you need to work hard, but sometimes you have to resign to fate. There are certain things which are beyond human control. It makes you sober at the time of success. When you are successful, you should not just go become very highly emotional. Anything can happen. You are successful today, tomorrow you may just become unsuccessful, or you something may happen to you. So you should not become very successful, very highly emotional and very happy when you are successful. Neither you should become very sad if you are defeated, or if the things doesn't turn out as you expect it to be. uh, history reading, it provokes respect for the righteousness and contempt for the wicked. See how deeper understanding of history Ziauddin Barani had. He said ki, what is righteousness, what is good. And if you read history, you will understand that people who sided with the righteousness, who were righteousness, are eventually rewarded. And if people who are wicked, they are later on defeated in their life. It is the strongest foundation of truth. Mm, it depict what is right and what is wrong, what is justice and what is operation, what is obedience and what is rebel, what is virtue and what is wise. Otherwise, we may never know it. And his writing is quite didactic. He gives a very clear instruction, very fearless, and he writes with a missionary zeal. Sometimes he puts his ideas in the mouth of the historical character, like Tacitus had done in the Greek history writing, and this really had a dramatic effect. Because, in fact, instead of historian telling us, if some historical character tell us, that becomes more effective. He projects Firoz Tughlaq as an ideal monarch, and he is quite harsh to Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was quite inconsistent, and he sees that past is like a battleground between good and evil, and men are combatant. You have to fight with the good against the evil, and they are destined to get what they deserve. So this is where we are going to stop today our discussion on Sultanate history writing. We will continue in the next class. So today we have discussed about how it has started, the background, some important, feature of this historiography that developed during the Sultanate period. I told you about the some of the texts like Chachanama, and then Hassan Nizami's Tajul Masir, Minajul Siraj, then Tariq-e Mubarak Shahi, then Ziauddin Barni we have discussed quite in detail, because he is an important historian and he needs a detailed treatment. So we will continue in the next class. If you are having any doubt about till this, you can ask me.